FOMO, the fear of missing out. Sometimes when the market has so much energy and there's so many things going on, we sometimes make a poor decision. I'd like to give you the tools that you need to help get your offer accepted and avoid the pitfalls and the red flags that may pop up. Today, Missy Buttrum is going to talk about what markets are doing well and where you can find good opportunity to purchase a home. We're also going to talk a little bit about how much should you pay per square foot and what is a good deal. When we speak to Kris, we're going to discuss what we can do to make sure that our offer is accepted and our funding is also going to go through. And Al is going to walk through our condition report. So when we make that offer and get that report back, we know what we're getting into. Before we get started, I want to share a story of one of our listeners. There was a house for sale and it's overpriced. It needs new mechanicals, new appliances, probably a new garage, and they're asking close to $200 a square foot. And when we're talking about the fear of missing out or that FOMO, it doesn't mean that you have to offer too much. Offer what you think is fair. It will help drive the market to more manageable levels if we all do our part in making sure that we're asking and offering a fair price. In this segment, we're going to talk about FOMO, fear of missing out, and how to avoid those bad deals and traps that can happen in a seller's market. So Missy, what neighborhoods are going crazy and where's the place to buy? What's rising right now?
Right now, believe it or not, West Allis is a growing market. For years I said, hey, if you want to stay next to the city, go to West Allis, great value. But even that town went from a year ago, that same house for $160 is now in the 200s. So very growing market, but still a decent deal versus going out into Waukesha County where your average price is closer to $300. Mm-hmm. So still not a bad deal, but an up and coming market.
I see West Allis with those types of prices. I see a lot of millennials moving in there, and Starbucks are going to move in and everything else. Right. So it'll take a few years, and those neighborhoods are going to be fantastic. So what should you look for in the average price per square foot, and what neighborhoods have higher or lower prices per square foot?
Well, commonly a good rule of thumb is about $200 per square for an existing home. Milwaukee, more $150, $175 per square. If you're looking at more newer construction, you're closer to $250, $300 per square. So that's a good rule of thumb to be watching. There are some suburbs in north Milwaukee, Shorewood, Whitefish Bay that are going closer. Even the existing homes are going for almost $300 per square. So it all depends on what neighborhoods you're looking at.
But you gave us a good marks to look for. Yeah. If I'm looking, earlier we talked about multifamilies. What's the price per square foot that you're seeing in multifamily homes in a couple different neighborhoods?
So multifamilies, we look at it more as a per unit. Mm-hmm. So anything from $30,000 to $70,000 per unit in the Milwaukee areas is a great price. Outer suburbs are going for more like $100,000 per unit. So it's more how you have to look at pricing in multifamily. It's a little different nut.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think we're going to have a whole episode on investment properties and how to work those numbers out. So what's the average sales price in some of these local neighborhoods?
Well, in Waukesha County, last year it went from $325,000 for an average sold price to $360,000. Yeah.
Booming
but
market.
Interest rates came down.
Right.
They were closer to 4. Now we're at under 2 in some places. Mm-hmm. Milwaukee County saw like substantial growth, so they went from $183,000 to $220,000 average price for Milwaukee County.
That was a big jump.
Yeah, for them it's very big. Right now, currently Kenosha County average price is about $231,000, and Washington County is at $326,000, so very close to the Waukesha County market.
How can your buyer's agent help you determine if you're paying too much?
Well, that's a very important job with buyer's agent and why you should use one. They can do what's called a market analysis. So let's say you're going over to 123 Main Street with your buyer agent, and you're kind of interested in it. You're concerned about the pricing. Your agent can run a market analysis, and that will tell you what things are going for in that area. In my opinion, I don't think those prices are going to flatline. I think they're just catching up to where they needed to be, especially the suburbs like West Dallas and Milwaukee, as I was talking about before.
How do appraisals work? What if it comes in low after the offer is accepted?
Great question again, John. Basically, how that works is, let's say a person has an offer in on a house, they have financing, and it's $200,000 is their price. Appraiser goes through, they run their comparable analysis, and they come in at $190. So that bank, the lender, will not finance the $200. They will only finance up to the $190. So what happens is you have a $10,000 gap. So either the seller has to come down, or the buyer has to come up, or we just meet in the middle. 9 times out of 10, we negotiate it somehow, but there is that discrepancy.
How much is too much to deal with in a house project?
So this is going to depend a lot on the type of financing a buyer has. Again, work with your buyer agent. If you have FHA, VA, they're a little more stringent in what they will allow in a house. They want it to be more move-in ready. They don't want any peeling paint. They don't want plumbing issues. They don't want electrical issues. A roof has to have at least 5 years left on it. So a little more stringent. So be sure you're discussing that with your buyer's agent.
Okay.
The other type, conventional, not as stringent, but still has its standards, a little looser on those things. And of course, there's always cash. Cash is king. You can get anything.
Right.
Get yourself a fixer-upper. So the other thing to discuss with your agent as well is how much do you want to deal with. I have lots of buyers who will be like, hey, Missy, I'll deal with carpet and paint, but I'm not going to deal with a bad basement, or I'm not going to deal with updating electrical. So it kind of depends on your buyer situation.
We'll ask Kris a little bit more about the different requirements for FHA and conventional in our next segment. For now, do you have a success story that you can share with us?
Yes, for sure. I have a success story in West Allis, believe it or not. I had a lady who works at my veterinarian clinic, and she put in with me like 10 offers. We looked at 20 different houses. Her duplex was going to get sold, and I had a motivated seller come in on my Cell 911 company, and I walked into that place, and as I got to know her over the 6 months, I knew that place was perfect for her. Like the layout, the size, and I went in there, looking to make a cash offer with our Cell 911, but it ended up being something perfect for her, and I negotiated it for her, and she was willing to take on the electrical issues and the updating the carpet and the paint and the kitchen and those things, and she was just delighted. I get messages from her at least a couple times a week like, oh, I'm just so happy you did this for me, and I mean, that just makes my job so much better.
That's just got to make your job, that's just wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story. That was a wonderful success. In our next segment, Kris is going to tell us a little bit more about the different types of loans and what we talked about earlier, what the requirements are about them so that you can get your offer accepted. Like we said earlier, FOMO is the fear of missing out. And in an active market like this, where there's so much energy, it's easy to go out there and make a mistake or get yourself into a situation that might not be the best financial decision for you. When we look at a market like this, where there's so much energy and so many things happening, what is one of the number one traps that we can make sure that we understand so we don't fall into it?
Good question. One of the things we take a look at as far as for an appraisal, appraisals determine as far as what the value of the property is. Now, in some cases, we're getting what is called an appraisal waiver. Well, guess what? We don't need an appraisal. They're going to take the value as it is. Some cases, they do require an appraisal. And if you think of it, it is a state certified person. It's a third party that they're going to go out and verify at least 3 homes that sold recently like that house, and they're going to make sure that it's going to be worth what you're going to buy for. As a lender, we want to make sure that the collateral that we are taking is going to be worth what you're going to buy it for. In some cases in this crazy market, buyers are offering way more than what the property was listed at. So appraisals can be quite a bit of a challenge these days. Now remember, I can only go off of the lower of the appraised value or purchase price. So when we have an appraisal coming in less than the purchase price, then there's a dilemma. In a normal market, typically we go back to the seller and say, hey, your property's not worth that much. They can then in turn take a look at the appraisal, see if the appraiser missed any recent solds or comps, as we like to call it, and do a reconsideration of value. And then from there they can determine, okay, we're going to reduce the price down or we can increase it up, and everybody moves forward as planned. In this market, sometimes buyers, they have to waive the appraisal. So therefore, if the appraisal comes in less, they're going to have to make up the difference. In conventional financing, what's nice is that we're able to offer one-time mortgage insurance where they can take that gap and then in essence pay PMI one time and avoid coming up with that difference. So it's just a different way of looking at things. It kind of fits the needs as far as what this market is going on today.
So you have solutions if it does happen. How often is it happening?
All depends upon the market that you're in. Each market has its own little niche areas where some appraisals are coming in, some appraisals are not coming in. So to answer that question, it all depends upon the timing and the type of house it is.
In our earlier episodes, we talked a lot about guidelines, and if you're a home buyer and you're making $50,000 a year and you have a 700 credit score, is it just an automatic that you're going to get a loan, or what if your credit score is not quite as good? How does that work?
Take a look at the guidelines. We all have to fit into the box as far as what each individual loan program requires. In addition to, I don't know if many people are aware of this, you have to run your file through what is called an automated underwriting system, or AUS. Now with that, it's a computer system and it analyzes the level of risk. It takes a look at credit score, it takes a look at your income, it takes a look at your reserves, many other factors. With that, when you run it through the computer system, we sit and wait, and then it kicks us out an answer. Our goal is we want what is called an approved eligible. So from an approved eligible, I can take that, I can show that to my underwriter. Now, keep in mind, if I say you make $15,000 a month, I have to show that in paycheck stubs, W-2s, tax returns, verifications of employment. So whatever I put in, I have to verify it.
That's good to know.
Now, an interesting case that we ran through, you mentioned as far as for a 700 credit score, 50,000, that should run right through, no problem. I ran into a situation the other day. It was a 634 credit score, 20% down on a single family home at 12 months of reserves. It would not take a conventional financing. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they set the guidelines, they set their tolerance levels with that. Now that could change all the time. And again, there's multiple factors that go in there. In this particular case, the customer had some recent derogatory, so it just wasn't taking it conventional. Now the good news is that we were able to fit him into a different loan program and continue to move forward. But it all depends upon as far as for the risk factor these days and the tolerance levels that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA are willing to take.
There are other solutions. So if a Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae doesn't work, there's conventionals, and then there's alternate past that, there's other non-conventional loans.
Yep, so if we take a look at Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, if that doesn't work, then we can take a look at the FHA program. And then from there, we can take a look at maybe something other than the fixed rate market that's out there.
Do you have a success story of someone who is operating in this seller's market, a successful buyer who's gotten their offer accepted?
Oh, I do have a success story. We recently had a customer who sold their house and purchased a new house same day, and they didn't have to worry about any contingency. So it's nice, the customer was able to purchase their house the same day as the same day they sold it. So it was very nice. It was a great success story.
Thank you so much for that great success story, Kris. I look forward to next week hearing about more people who are getting their offer accepted as a result of watching this show. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
McLario Firm, and we're going to talk about condition report. What is a condition report?
Condition report is a real important document, and people kind of think of it as a negative in a real estate transaction, but it's something we really need to focus on. A condition report is filled out by the seller, and it discloses any known conditions of consequence with regard to the property. So the basement leaks, there's something wrong with the roof, the furnace, whatever's going on, that's going to be disclosed or should be disclosed in the condition report.
So you said this is filled out by the seller, or do they always fill it out accurately?
If they're well advised, they do.
Okay.
The tendency when we're selling is we want to put the gloss over everything and make the property look perfect. But that's not the way we do this. What I always advise my clients is when you're filling out that condition report, you fill out everything you can think of. You spend a minute thinking about every issue it asks you about, and if you have anything to say about any of those issues, you put it in there. And the reason you put it in there is because once you've disclosed it, you can no longer be accused of hiding it from a seller. So put it on there, let them decide whether they want to buy it, particularly in a hot real estate market. And then protect yourself. Really what that is legally is that's protection. If you've disclosed it in that condition report, they can't come after you for not telling them about it.
Okay, so that's from the seller's side, you want to disclose it. But from the buyer's side, let's say you find a seller who doesn't want to disclose that stuff. What kind of pitfalls could you run into, or how does that affect the offer to purchase and getting your purchase accepted?
Sure, great question. So what we're really looking at when we're talking about a seller who doesn't want to disclose, you're probably also going to get a request for what's called an as-is purchase. You're going to see the words as is in quotes in your purchase. And what that means is they're asking you as the buyer to purchase that property exactly as it sits, regardless of what's wrong with it, regardless if it collapses the day after you buy it, or it's underwater, or the roof's about to cave in. You're purchasing it as is. Now, if you are intimately familiar with that property, if you've been living there for 10 years and the person who owns it hasn't, that may make sense. However, be very wary of that. If they're not disclosing and they're asking you to purchase as is, not only are they not giving you any information, they're also asking you to guarantee that you will not ever criticize them for hiding anything.
So as is that going to affect your ability to get a mortgage?
It will, because mortgageors, are obviously going to be wary about any arrangement like that, and then they're going to send their inspector in. So now what you've done is you've really kind of kicked the ball down the road a little bit, where you said, we as buyer and seller aren't going to inspect this place. We're going to let the bank do it. And if something comes up with the bank and the bank declines to give you a mortgage, are you going to get out of it? Are you going to pay some more for this property? Is the seller going to pay to fix it? We haven't addressed any of those things, and we're throwing a big monkey wrench in the works late in the game.
Right, and if you're that late in the game, you have money in the game.
You do.
You put some money down, and so that could be a really big red flag of a seller trying to get some money or do something a little bit shady.
I always think about this like a dating relationship. When you're a seller and a buyer, everyone's a little infatuated. The house is perfect. It sparkles when you look at it.
You're thinking about that barbecue.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you're thinking about the graduation party you're going to host in 10 years and all this stuff. And we want to make sure we're addressing hard issues then, because it's easier to address hard issues when you're dating than when you're stuck together and the transaction's done. So get it dealt with up front. It really isn't that hard, what I've found, to address these things up front. Hey, I have a concern about the basement. Can we get that inspected? Or whatever it is, instead of waiting, and closing's in 2 days, and now we got an inspection report that's come back negatively, and now what do we do?
Mm-hmm. So the condition report can be a good pre-step to the inspection to kind of address a lot of those issues that the inspector or the appraiser is going to red flag as not getting you your mortgage or not letting this deal go through.
Absolutely, and it'll even protect you beyond the inspection. And the biggest example is wet basements. If you've ever had a wet basement and you're selling a house, put it in the condition report, because the inspector isn't going to know whether you had a wet basement 10 years ago and you carpeted over it and it's been okay since. But when it happens again, if that's discovered in the litigation process, then it looks like the seller withheld that information, whether the inspector caught it or not.
Yeah.
If the seller put it in the condition report, they're clean because they told everything they knew.
That's good to know. So if we're getting a house, the seller gave us a condition report, what kind of things should we look for?
Well, you're going to want to take it to whatever professional is aware of these kind of things. So if you, for example, one thing I see a lot is, well, we had reinforcement work done in the basement. We've got steel beams in our basement. It may be perfectly sound, but I'm sure going to want to get someone down there to say, yes, this was professionally done and it's as good as new. Whether, or, you know, this was sort of a Band-Aid fix, it's really not going to hold, and I'm worried you're not going to be able to get a mortgage in 10 years.
So when you get your offer accepted and you're going through this process, make sure you have professionals on your team look through the condition report to make sure that you're protected.
Thank you all for some great information. Don't get caught up in FOMO. Make sure that the offer that you're putting out there is a good offer that you're comfortable with. Get your offer accepted, get your dream home, and get a fair deal. I'll see you next week on the Offer Accepted Show, a show for home buyers in a seller's market.